When Maya walked into her sister's pristine new home last Saturday, she was carrying a modest housewarming gift and wearing her best thrift store dress. What she didn't expect was for Rebecca to announce to a room full of guests that Maya was too pathetic to afford rent, let alone a mortgage. The laughter that followed still echoed in Maya's ears 3 days later. What none of them knew was that Maya's signature was the only reason Rebecca had keys to that house at all. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most holds all the power you never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October rain had been falling steadily for 2 hours when Maya Chen finally pulled her aging Honda Civic into the circular driveway of 4247 Maple Heights Drive. The house rose before her like something from a magazine cover, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of modern architecture that whispered wealth without having to shout it. Warm golden light spilled from every window, and she could already hear the distant hum of conversation and clinking glasses from inside. Maya sat in her car for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching droplets race down her windshield. Through the large front windows, she could see silhouettes moving about, wine glasses catching the light, everyone looking effortlessly sophisticated in a way that always made her feel like she was wearing a costume to someone else's party. She glanced down at her outfit one more time, a navy blue dress she'd found at a consignment shop 3 months ago. It was clean, pressed, and fit her well, but she knew the moment she walked through those doors, someone would notice the slightly faded hem or the way the fabric didn't quite have the drape of something expensive. The gift bag on her passenger seat contained a small succulent in a hand-painted pot she'd made herself during a pottery class at the community center. It had seemed like a thoughtful choice when she'd wrapped it this morning, personal and meaningful, but now it felt embarrassingly amateur. Rebecca would probably receive crystal vases and expensive art pieces tonight, gifts that matched the sophistication of her new home. Maya took a deep breath, grabbed her purse and the gift bag, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The rain had softened to a light mist, and she could smell the wet earth from the perfectly manicured landscaping that surrounded the property. Even the driveway was impressive, stamped concrete that probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months at her job as a community bank teller. The front door was heavy mahogany with a smart lock that probably recognized fingerprints. Before Maya could even reach for the doorbell, the door swung open to reveal Rebecca's husband, David, holding a glass of red wine and wearing a smile that was equal parts welcoming and slightly strained. "Maya, you made it," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Rebecca was starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost." "Sorry I'm a little late," Maya replied, stepping into the entryway and trying not to gape at the soaring ceilings and the chandelier that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Traffic was heavier than I expected." David nodded and gestured toward the main living area where the party was clearly in full swing. "Can I get you something to drink? We've got wine, beer, some signature cocktails," Rebecca insisted on. "Wine would be great, thank you." As David headed toward what Maya assumed was the kitchen, she took a moment to really look around. The house was even more impressive on the inside than it had appeared from the street. The living room flowed seamlessly into a dining area and an open kitchen, all of it decorated in shades of cream and gray with carefully chosen accent pieces that looked like they'd been selected by a professional. Large abstract paintings hung on the walls, and through the sliding glass doors, Maya could see a covered patio with outdoor furniture that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The guests were exactly what she'd expected, a mix of Rebecca's colleagues from her marketing firm, David's friends from the tech company where he worked, and what appeared to be several of their new neighbors. Everyone looked polished and successful, the kind of people who belonged in a house like this. Maya spotted Rebecca near the kitchen island, gesturing animately while telling a story to a small group of listeners. Her sister looked radiant, wearing a white silk blouse and perfectly tailored black pants, her dark hair styled in loose waves that probably cost more than Maya's entire outfit. Rebecca had always been the beautiful one, the successful one, the sister who seemed to have been born knowing exactly how to navigate the world in a way that made everything look effortless. When Rebecca caught sight of Maya, her face lit up with a smile that seemed genuine enough, though Maya had learned to read the subtle differences between her sister's real expressions and her performative ones. "Maya, there you are," Rebecca called out, excusing herself from her conversation and making her way over. "I was starting to think you'd chickened out." "Just running a little behind," Maya said, holding out the gift bag. "This is for you, for the house." Rebecca accepted the bag with a gracious smile and peeked inside. "Oh, how sweet. You made this yourself, didn't you? It's very cute." The word cute landed with the particular sting that only a sister could deliver, wrapped in affection, but carrying the unmistakable subtext that what Maya had created was charming in the way a child's art project might be charming. Not quite good enough for the adult world, but appreciated for the effort. "I thought you might like having something green in the house," Maya said, trying to keep her voice light. "Succulents are supposed to bring good luck." "That's so thoughtful," Rebecca replied, though Maya noticed she was already looking past her toward other guests. "David should be back with your drink in a minute. In the meantime, let me introduce you to some people." For the next hour, Maya found herself being led from conversation to conversation, always feeling like she was one step behind the rhythm of each group. Rebecca's friends were polite but distant, the kind of people who asked what she did for work and then seemed to lose interest when she mentioned the community bank. The neighbors were friendly enough, but they spoke in a shorthand of shared experiences that Maya couldn't quite penetrate. References to the homeowner association and local restaurants and the challenges of finding good contractors. Maya nursed her wine and tried to contribute to conversations about property values and renovation projects. But she could feel herself becoming increasingly invisible as the evening wore on. It was a familiar feeling, one that had followed her through family gatherings and social events for most of her life. She was Rebecca's younger sister, the one who was still figuring things out, still working a job that most people in this room would consider entry-level, still living in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of town that wasn't quite trendy yet. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, surrounded by successful people in a beautiful house, feeling more alone than she did on quiet evenings in her small apartment with her books and her plants and her sketches for pottery projects. Around 9 o'clock, as the party was reaching its peak energy, Rebecca decided it was time for the house tour. She gathered everyone in the living room, wine glass in hand, practically glowing with pride as she began to describe the renovation process. "When David and I first saw this place, it was honestly a disaster. The previous owners had let it fall into complete disrepair. We're talking water damage, outdated electrical, a kitchen from the 1970s that looked like something out of a horror movie." The guests laughed appreciatively, and Rebecca warmed to her audience. "It took us almost a year to get everything the way we wanted it. The permitting process alone was a nightmare, and don't even get me started on finding contractors who actually showed up when they said they would. But the real challenge was the financing." Maya felt a small flutter in her stomach, though she couldn't quite place why. "The mortgage process was absolutely brutal," Rebecca continued, beginning to walk toward the kitchen as the group followed. "We must have submitted paperwork 50 times, and there were moments when I honestly thought it wasn't going to happen. The underwriters were so picky about every little detail. Thank God David's credit score is basically perfect because mine had taken a hit when I switched jobs last year." They moved through the kitchen, Rebecca pointing out the custom cabinetry and the imported stone countertops, but Maya found herself only half listening. Something about the way Rebecca was talking about the mortgage process was nagging at her, a detail that felt important but that she couldn't quite grasp. "Which bank did you end up going with?" asked one of the neighbors, a woman with perfectly highlighted hair and diamond earrings that caught the light. "First National Community Bank," Rebecca replied. "They're not the biggest lender in the area, but they ended up being the only ones willing to work with us. The whole process was actually pretty smooth once we got past that initial hiccup." Maya's mouth went dry. First National Community Bank. Her bank.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The place where she'd worked for the past 3 years, where she processed loan applications and reviewed credit reports, and occasionally flagged files for upper management when the numbers didn't quite add up, but the applicants seemed like good risks anyway.
She remembered the application now, remembered sitting at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon in March, looking at Rebecca and David's financial information spread across her computer screen. She'd recognized the names immediately, of course, though she'd tried to maintain her professional objectivity as she reviewed their income statements and credit histories. The numbers had been close, right on the borderline between approval and denial, the kind of case that could go either way depending on who was making the decision. Maya had spent her lunch break that day walking around the block, weighing her options. She could have processed the application by the book, let it go through the standard channels, where it probably would have been denied based on Rebecca's recent credit dings and their overall debt load. Or she could flag it for manual review by the senior loan officer with a note about the applicant's strong employment history and the solid appraisal on the property. She'd chosen the latter, typing up a careful memo that highlighted the positive aspects of the application without explicitly advocating for approval. She'd never mentioned to anyone that the applicants were her sister and brother-in-law. As far as the bank was concerned, Maya Chen and Rebecca Chen Morrison were just two people who happened to share a common last name. The tour continued through the house, Rebecca's voice a constant stream of details about crown molding and hardwood floors and the challenges of choosing the right shade of paint for the guest bathroom. Maya followed along, her mind reeling with the realization of what she'd done and what it meant. She had made Rebecca's dream house possible. Her signature on that memo had been the difference between approval and denial, between Rebecca standing here tonight showing off her beautiful home and Rebecca still living in the cramped townhouse she'd been complaining about for years. And Rebecca had no idea. As they returned to the main living area, Maya excused herself to use the bathroom, needing a moment alone to process what she discovered. The guest bathroom was just as beautiful as the rest of the house, all marble and brushed gold fixtures with hand towels that looked like they'd never been used. Maya stared at herself in the mirror, taking in her slightly flushed cheeks and the way her thrift store dress looked in the soft lighting. She thought about all the times Rebecca had made subtle comments about Maya's financial situation, the gentle suggestions that maybe she should consider going back to school or finding a more ambitious career path. The assumption that Maya was somehow less capable, less successful, less important. When Maya returned to the party, she found the energy had shifted slightly. Some of the guests had begun to leave, and those who remained had settled into smaller, more intimate conversations. Rebecca was holding court near the fireplace, telling a story that Maya couldn't quite hear from across the room. Maya lingered near the kitchen island, finishing her wine and watching her sister bask in the admiration of her friends. Rebecca looked so confident, so completely in her element, surrounded by people who shared her aesthetic and her ambitions and her understanding of what success was supposed to look like. Great party, isn't it? Maya turned to find David approaching with a fresh glass of wine, which he offered to her with a friendly smile. It really is, Maya replied, accepting the glass gratefully. Rebecca seems so happy here. She is. We both are. This place has been a dream of ours for a long time. I know it might seem over the top to some people, but Rebecca grew up in apartments, you know? She always talked about wanting a house where she could really entertain, where she could have people over and not feel cramped or embarrassed about the space. Maya nodded, remembering their childhood in a series of small apartments, their mother working 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. Rebecca had always been determined to build a different kind of life for herself, and in many ways, Maya admired her sister's drive and ambition. The mortgage process was such a stress, David continued, lowering his voice slightly. I mean, Rebecca talks about it like it was just a minor inconvenience, but there were nights when she couldn't sleep, wondering if we were going to lose the house. When that final approval came through, she actually cried. Happy tears, but still, it was such a relief. Maya felt that familiar flutter in her stomach again. It sounds like it all worked out in the end. It did, thank God. Someone at the bank really went to bat for us, though we never found out who. Rebecca wrote thank you letters to everyone she had worked with, but the loan officer said the final decision had come from higher up in the organization. Whoever it was basically saved our dreams. Before Maya could respond, Rebecca's voice cut across the room, bright and carrying. Maya, come here for a second. I want to tell everyone about your pottery hobby. Maya's heart sunk as she realized that Rebecca was gesturing for her to join the group by the fireplace, where several guests were still gathered. The word hobby hit her like a small slap, reducing something that brought her genuine joy to the status of a casual pastime. She made her way over, conscious of the eyes on her, feeling once again like she was performing a role she hadn't auditioned for. "My sister Maya is so creative," Rebecca announced to the group, her arm sliding around Maya's shoulders in a gesture that was both affectionate and somehow patronizing. "She makes these adorable little pottery pieces in her spare time. The succulent she brought tonight is actually planted in one of her handmade pots." The guests murmured politely, and Maya felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. There was something about the way Rebecca was presenting her creativity, as if it were a charming quirk rather than a serious pursuit. "Do you sell your work anywhere?" asked one of Rebecca's colleagues, a woman with short blonde hair and an expensive-looking watch. "Oh, Maya's too modest for that." Rebecca jumped in before Maya could answer. "She just does it for fun, don't you? It's not like she's trying to make a living at it or anything." Maya felt the words stick in her throat. She does sell her pottery, actually, at a local arts collective downtown and occasionally at weekend markets. It wasn't a huge income stream, but it was something, a source of pride and a small supplement to her bank salary. But somehow, in this context, with Rebecca's dismissive tone and the expectant faces of the guests, it felt impossible to correct the record. "It's very relaxing," Maya managed to say, her voice coming out smaller than she had intended. "That's so nice," the blonde woman replied. "Everyone needs a creative outlet." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Maya remained trapped in the circle, feeling increasingly like a curiosity being displayed for the entertainment of Rebecca's sophisticated friends. Someone asked about her job at the bank, and Rebecca again answered for her. Maya works at one of the local community banks. It's very stable, very dependable. Not everyone needs to be climbing the corporate ladder, right? Some people are just happier with simpler lives. The words hung in the air like a judgment, and Maya felt something inside her begin to crack. Simpler lives. As if working at a bank and creating art and living according to her own values was somehow less worthy than Rebecca's version of success. "Actually," Maya said, her voice stronger now, "I really enjoy the work I do at the bank. I get to help people achieve their financial goals, and it's more complex than most people realize." Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course it is, sweetie. I didn't mean to imply otherwise." But the damage was done. Maya could see it in the polite but distant expressions of the guests, the way they'd already categorized her as Rebecca's less successful sister, the one who needed defending and explaining. The party continued around them, but Maya felt herself withdrawing, becoming more and more a spectator to her sister's success story. She helped clear some glasses when people began to leave, trying to be useful while feeling increasingly invisible. It was nearly 11 o'clock when the last guests finally departed, leaving just Maya, Rebecca, and David in the suddenly quiet house. The space felt different without the crowd, more intimate, but also somehow larger. The high ceilings and open floor plan created echoes where there before had been warm conversation. Rebecca kicked off her heels and sank onto the cream-colored sectional sofa with a satisfied sigh. "That went really well, don't you think?"
Everyone seemed to love the house. It was a great party, Maya agreed, though she was already mentally preparing to make her own exit. The evening had left her feeling drained in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "You know, Maya," Rebecca said, her tone shifting to something more serious, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Maya felt her stomach tighten. Conversations that began this way with Rebecca rarely ended well. "David and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. You're 28 years old, and you're still living in that tiny apartment, working the same job you had when you graduated college. Don't you want more for yourself?" David shifted uncomfortably on the other end of the sofa, clearly wishing he wasn't part of this conversation. "I'm happy with my life," Maya said carefully. "My job is stable, and I'm building something with my pottery. Not everyone defines success the same way." Rebecca's expression softened, but there was still something condescending in her tone. "I know you think you're content, but you're selling yourself short. You're smart, you're talented, but you're not pushing yourself. You're settling for ordinary when you could have so much more." Maya felt the familiar sting of being lectured by her older sister, the assumption that Rebecca knew what was best for everyone around her. What exactly are you suggesting? Maya asked. Well, for starters, you could think about going back to school. Get an MBA, maybe, or at least some kind of certification that would help you move up in banking. And the pottery thing is sweet, but it's not realistic as anything more than a hobby. You need to focus on building a real career. The words hit Maya like a series of small slaps. Everything she'd built for herself, everything that gave her life meaning and satisfaction, was being dismissed as inadequate, as a failure to live up to some standard that Rebecca had set without consulting her. And honestly, Rebecca continued, seemingly unaware of the effect her words were having, it's a little embarrassing sometimes, having to explain to people why my sister is still working as a bank teller. These are successful people, Maya. They don't understand why someone would choose to stay in such a basic job. The word embarrassing hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maya felt something inside her snap, a tension that had been building for years, finally reaching its breaking point. Embarrassing? Maya repeated, her voice quiet but steady. My life is embarrassing to you? Rebecca seemed to realize she'd gone too far. That's not what I meant. I just think you have so much potential and you're wasting it. Because I don't have a house like this? Because I don't make as much money as you do? Because I choose to spend my time making things with my hands instead of climbing some corporate ladder? Maya, that's not fair. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to fix me. There's a difference. Maya stood up, her legs feeling unsteady but her resolve growing stronger. You know what's funny, Rebecca? You keep talking about success and achievement and how I'm not living up to my potential, but you have no idea what I actually do, what I'm actually capable of. Rebecca's expression shifted from contrition to confusion. What do you mean? You think I'm just some simple bank teller who makes pottery as a cute hobby. You think my life is small and ordinary and somehow less important than yours. Maya, I don't think that. Yes, you do. You've made it clear all evening. Hell, you've made it clear for years. I'm the sister you have to explain, the one who didn't quite figure out how to be successful. Maya grabbed her purse from the kitchen counter, her movements sharp and decisive. But here's something you might find interesting. That mortgage approval you got, the one that made this whole dream house possible, that didn't happen by accident. Rebecca's face went pale. What are you talking about? I work at First National Community Bank, Rebecca. I processed your application. Your debt-to-income ratio was too high, your credit had taken a hit from the job change, and by all standard measures, you shouldn't have qualified for this loan. But I flagged your file for manual review. I wrote a memo highlighting the positive aspects of your application. I made sure it landed on the right desk with the right recommendation. I'm the someone higher up in the organization who made this house possible. Rebecca's face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like fear. You're lying, Rebecca whispered. David can verify it if he wants to pull the paperwork. My initials are on the approval memo. M.C. Maya Chen. Maya walked toward the front door, her hand on the handle before she turned back one last time. You want to know what's really pathetic, Rebecca? It's thinking that success is measured by square footage and salary figures. It's being so focused on what other people think that you can't see the people who actually care about you. It's having everything you ever wanted and still feeling like you need to tear other people down to feel good about yourself. She opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, leaving her sister's dream house behind her. As she walked to her car, Maya could hear the rain starting again, a gentle pattering on the roof and windows of the beautiful home that she had made possible. The drive back to her apartment gave her time to think, to process what had just happened, and what it meant. She felt something she hadn't felt in years when it came to her relationship with Rebecca. Clarity. For the first time, she saw their dynamic for what it really was, and more importantly, she saw herself for who she really was. Maya wasn't the failure Rebecca had always made her feel like. She wasn't living a smaller life or settling for less than she deserved. She was living according to her own values, pursuing work that had meaning and creating things that brought beauty into the world. She was helping people achieve their dreams, even when they didn't know it, even when they couldn't appreciate what she had done.
As she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, Maya felt a strange sense of peace. The building wasn't much to look at from the outside, and her one-bedroom unit on the second floor would never grace the pages of a design magazine. But it was hers, and it was filled with things she loved: books and plants and pieces of pottery that marked her journey as an artist. She climbed the stairs slowly, her key ready in her hand, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. She would go to work at the bank, where she would continue to help people navigate the complex world of loans and mortgages and financial planning. She would spend her evening at the pottery studio, where she was working on a series of bowls that incorporated a new glazing technique she'd been experimenting with. And somewhere across town, in a beautiful house that Maya's intervention had made possible, Rebecca would be lying awake wondering what else she didn't know about her little sister. Maya unlocked her door and stepped inside, switching on the lamp by the couch that cast a warm glow over her small living room. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, but somehow it felt different now. Not smaller or less important, but more valuable, more intentional. This was her space, filled with her choices, reflecting her priorities. She set her purse on the kitchen counter and filled the kettle for tea, thinking about the conversation she would have to have with Rebecca eventually. Because this wasn't really over, was it? This was just the beginning of a new understanding between them, one that would require Rebecca to see Maya as she really was, rather than as the projection of inadequacy she'd created. Maya smiled as she reached for her favorite mug, a piece she'd made in her first pottery class 3 years ago. It was slightly lopsided and the glaze had run a bit during firing, but it fit perfectly in her hands and held exactly the right amount of tea for a late-night cup. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. There would be loan applications to process and pottery to create, and probably a very uncomfortable phone call from Rebecca. But tonight, Maya Chen was exactly where she belonged, in a life she had built according to her own vision of what success could look like. As she waited for the water to boil up, Maya thought about the memo she'd written all those months ago, the careful words she'd chosen to advocate for her sister's loan approval without revealing their relationship. She'd done it out of love, out of a desire to see Rebecca happy, even knowing that Rebecca would never appreciate the gift for what it was. But now, Rebecca would have to reckon with the fact that her little sister, the one she'd spent years patronizing and pitying, had more power and influence than she had ever imagined. Maya wondered how that knowledge would change things between them, whether Rebecca would finally see her as an equal, or whether she would find new ways to diminish Maya's role in her own success. The kettle whistled, and Maya poured the hot water over her tea bag, watching the steam rise in the soft light of her kitchen. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean and preparing the ground for whatever would grow next. Maya's phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning, the shrill sound cutting through the peaceful quiet of her Sunday routine. She was sitting at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, still in her pajamas, when Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. Maya let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again 5 minutes later, and again 10 minutes after that. By the fourth call, Maya turned the phone face down and went about making herself breakfast, scrambling eggs and toasting the homemade bread she'd bought at the farmer's market yesterday. The calls continued throughout the morning, each one accompanied by increasingly frantic text messages that Maya chose not to read. It wasn't until noon that Maya finally listened to the voicemails. Rebecca's voice progressed from confused to angry to something approaching panic across the series of messages. Maya, we need to talk. Call me back immediately. I don't understand what you meant last night, and David is asking questions I can't answer. This is ridiculous. You can't just drop a bombshell like that and then disappear. Whatever game you're playing, it's not funny. Maya, please, I'm trying to understand what happened. If what you said is true, then we need to discuss this like adults. I'm your sister. The final message was different. Rebecca's voice smaller and more uncertain than Maya had heard in years. I pulled the mortgage paperwork this morning. Your initials are on the approval memo.
I need to know why you didn't tell me. I need to understand what this means. Maya deleted the messages without responding and spent the rest of Sunday in deliberate silence, tending to her plants and working on a new pottery piece, a large serving bowl that required careful attention to the thickness of the walls. The repetitive motion of the potter's wheel and the feel of clay beneath her hands helped center her thoughts. Monday morning at the bank brought its own complications. Maya had barely settled at her desk when her supervisor, Janet Holloway, appeared with a concerned expression and a cup of coffee that suggested this conversation might take a while. Janet said, "Maya, I need to ask you about something. I got a call this weekend from someone asking about one of our loan files. Specifically, they wanted to know about the approval process for a mortgage we processed back in March." Maya's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Which file?" "Rebecca Chen Morrison and David Morrison." The caller identified herself as Rebecca and said she was one of the borrowers, which is legitimate, but she was asking very specific questions about who had been involved in the approval decision. She mentioned your name specifically. Janet's tone was careful, professional, but Maya could hear the underlying concern. In the banking industry, any questions about loan processes had to be taken seriously, especially when they came from the borrowers themselves. "She's my sister," Maya said simply. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. "You didn't mention that when you flagged the file for review." "I followed all proper protocols. I disclosed the relationship to senior management in my review memo, and I recused myself from any final decision-making. The approval came from Tom's office, not from me." This was technically true. Maya had mentioned in her detailed memo that she had a personal relationship with the applicants, though she'd buried that disclosure deep in the paperwork and hadn't emphasized the family connection. The final approval had indeed come from Tom Reeves, the senior loan officer, though Maya knew her recommendation had carried significant weight. Janet nodded slowly. "I'm not questioning your professional conduct, Maya. I'm just trying to understand why your sister is calling now, asking questions about something that was settled months ago." Maya chose her words carefully. "There was a family gathering this weekend where the mortgage came up in conversation. I think Rebecca was surprised to learn that I had been involved in the process at all. She probably just wanted to understand the timeline better." "And you're comfortable with how you handled the situation?" "Completely. I followed bank policy to the letter." Janet seemed satisfied with this explanation, though she noticed she made a note in the small notebook she always carried. "All right, if she calls again with questions, refer her directly to me. We want to make sure any inquiries about loan processes go through the proper channels." After Janet left, Maya found it difficult to concentrate on her work. She processed routine paperwork and answered customer questions, but her mind kept drifting to the implications of Rebecca's weekend phone call. Her sister was clearly rattled by the revelation, enough to start digging into the bank's records and asking pointed questions about the approval process. Maya wondered what David had said when Rebecca showed him the paperwork, whether he understood the significance of Maya's involvement in her financial life, or if he was still trying to piece together what had happened. The thought brought Maya a strange satisfaction. For years, she'd been invisible to her family, the sister who worked a simple job and lived a quiet life, while Rebecca collected achievements and accolades. Now Rebecca was forced to confront the fact that Maya's signature had been the key to her most important accomplishment. Around 3 o'clock, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. When she opened it, she found a message from David. "Maya, this is David. Rebecca gave me your number. Would you be willing to meet for coffee this week? I'd like to understand what happened with our mortgage, and I think it would be better to discuss this in person rather than through Rebecca. Would Thursday evening work?" Maya stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Thursday at 6, the coffee shop on 5th and Main." The rest of the week passed in a strange suspension of normal routine. Maya went to work, attended her pottery classes, and maintained her usual schedule, but she felt like she was moving through a world where all the fundamental relationships had shifted slightly off their axes. Rebecca didn't call again, but Maya could feel her sister's presence like a storm system moving across the horizon. Thursday evening arrived with an unexpected warmth for late October, the kind of golden autumn light that made even ordinary city streets look painterly. Maya arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early and chose a table near the back where they could speak privately. She ordered her usual Earl Grey tea and settled in to wait. David appeared exactly at 6, looking less polished than he had at the housewarming party. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. He ordered a large black coffee and joined Maya at her table with the air of someone who had been dreading this conversation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "I know this is an unusual situation." Maya nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been trying to understand what happened last weekend," David said. "Rebecca told me what you said about the mortgage, and when we looked at the paperwork, we found your initials on the approval memo. But I don't understand why you didn't tell us you were involved." "Would it have mattered?" Maya asked. David considered this. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. It changes things, knowing that someone in your family went out of their way to help us." "Did I go out of my way?" The question seemed to catch David off guard. "Didn't you? Rebecca said you basically saved our application when it should have been denied." Maya took a sip of her tea, choosing her words carefully. "I processed your application according to standard bank procedures. Your financial situation was borderline, but there were positive factors that warranted consideration. I flagged the file for manual review and included a detailed analysis of your creditworthiness. The final decision was made by senior management. But you advocated for us." "I advocated for a thorough review of a complex application. That's my job." David frowned, clearly struggling to understand the distinction Maya was drawing. "Rebecca seems to think you had more influence than that. She's convinced you pulled strings or used your position to get us approved when we shouldn't have been." "What do you think?" "I think I don't understand banking well enough to know what's normal and what isn't. But I know that Rebecca has been a mess since Sunday night. She keeps asking why you didn't tell us, why you let us think the approval came out of nowhere." Maya leaned back in her chair, studying David's face. He looked genuinely confused and concerned, not angry or accusatory. She realized that, unlike Rebecca, David didn't seem to view Maya's involvement as a threat or embarrassment. He was simply trying to understand a situation that had complicated his understanding of their family dynamics. "Can I ask you something, David?" Maya said. "How often does Rebecca talk about me?" The question surprised him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, in your day-to-day life, when you're talking about work or family or plans for the future, how often does my name come up?" David shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. Sometimes, when there are family events or holidays." "What does she say about me?" "Maya, I don't think this is productive. I'm not trying to put you in an awkward position. I'm trying to understand how Rebecca sees me, how she talks about my life when I'm not around." David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "She worries about you. She thinks you're not living up to your potential." "What potential is that?" "She thinks you're smart and capable, but that you've gotten stuck in a safe job that doesn't challenge you. She wishes you were more ambitious." Maya nodded. "And what did you think about that assessment?" "Honestly, I always thought Rebecca was being a little unfair. I seemed happy when I saw you at family gatherings. Not everyone needs to be climbing the corporate ladder." "But you didn't disagree with her when she said those things." David's silence was answer enough. "Here's what I want you to understand," Maya said. "I've been working at the bank for 3 years. In that time, I've processed thousands of loan applications. I've seen people's financial lives laid bare, their dreams and mistakes and desperate hopes all reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. I've learned to read between the lines of credit reports and tax returns and employment histories." She paused, taking another sip of her tea. "When your application crossed my desk, I saw a couple with stable jobs and a solid plan for their future."
Yes, your debt-to-income ratio was high, and yes, Rebecca's credit had taken a hit from her job transition. But I also saw 2 people who'd been responsible with money for years, who had saved for a substantial down payment, and who were buying a house in a stable neighborhood with good resale value. David was listening intently now. "I didn't approve your loan, David. I recommended that it receive careful consideration rather than automatic denial. The difference is important. Tom Reeves made the final decision based on his own analysis of your financial profile. But without your recommendation, without my recommendation, your application probably would have been denied based on the automated scoring system. But that doesn't mean I broke any rules or bent any policies. It means I did my job the way it's supposed to be done, looking at the whole picture rather than just the numbers. David nodded slowly. So why didn't you tell us? Because it wasn't relevant. You qualified for the loan based on your financial merits. The fact that I happened to be the person who processed your application was just a coincidence. But it wasn't really a coincidence, was it? You're Rebecca's sister. Maya smiled slightly. Do you think I should have recused myself entirely? Passed your application to someone else who might not have looked as carefully at the positive factors in your profile? The question hung in the air between them. David was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation, the way Maya's professional judgment and family relationship had intersected in ways that couldn't be easily separated. Rebecca thinks you were trying to manipulate us, David said finally. By helping you get approved for a loan you wanted? By not telling us about your involvement. She feels like you've been holding this over our heads, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Maya felt a flare of anger, quickly suppressed. Is that what you think? I don't know what to think. But I know that Rebecca is feeling like she doesn't understand her relationship with you anymore. She's questioning everything, wondering what else you haven't told us. What else I haven't told you about what? About your job, your life, your capabilities. She's starting to realize that maybe she's been underestimating you. Maya finished her tea and set the cup down carefully. David, can I tell you something about Rebecca? He nodded. Rebecca has always needed to feel like she's the successful one in our family. She's the older sister, the one who figured out how to navigate the world in a way that looks impressive to other people. That dynamic worked for both of us for a long time because I was content to let her have that role. Maya paused, gathering her thoughts. But Rebecca's version of success depends on everyone else being less successful than she is. She needs me to be the struggling younger sister who hasn't figured out her life yet. She needs to be able to patronize my choices and worry about my future and feel superior to my accomplishments. David was very still, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. What happened at the housewarming party wasn't really about the mortgage, Maya continued. It was about Rebecca's need to diminish me in front of her friends, to make sure everyone understood that I was the less impressive sister. She's been doing it for years, but that night I finally got tired of it. So you told her about the mortgage to hurt her? I told her about the mortgage because I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of having my life dismissed as pathetic and ordinary when I'm actually quite good at what I do. Maya gathered her purse and stood up from the table. David, you seem like a good person, and I'm glad you and Rebecca are happy in your new house. But I want you to understand something. I didn't reveal my role in your mortgage approval to manipulate anyone or to hold anything over your heads. I revealed it because I was tired of being treated like my contributions don't matter. David remained seated, looking up at her with an expression that was part confusion and part dawning understanding. What happens now? He asked. Now you and Rebecca decide how you want to handle the fact that someone you've been condescending to for years actually has more influence in your life than you realized. That's not my problem to solve. Maya left Javid sitting in the coffee shop and walked home through the gathering dusk, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The conversation had clarified something important for her. She wasn't interested in using her knowledge of the mortgage approval as a weapon against Rebecca, but she was also not willing to pretend it hadn't happened or to downplay its significance. For the first time in her adult life, Maya felt like she was operating from a position of strength rather than defense in her relationship with her family. She had information, influence, and professional credibility that Rebecca had never suspected. More importantly, she had finally found the courage to stop allowing herself to be diminished. The weekend passed quietly, with no contact from Rebecca or David. Maya spent Saturday at the farmer's market and Sunday working on pottery, enjoying the peaceful rhythm of her normal routine. She was beginning to think that perhaps the crisis had passed when Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the bank. Maya was reviewing loan applications when she looked up to see her mother, Helen Chen, standing at the customer service counter. Helen was a small woman who had always carried herself with the precise dignity of someone who had worked hard for everything she had, but today she looked uncertain, almost fragile. Maya's stomach dropped. Her mother rarely came to the bank, and her presence here could only mean that Rebecca had involved her in the situation. Maya finished her current transaction and walked over to the counter. "Mom," she said, keeping her voice neutral, "this is a surprise." Helen's smile was strained. "Hello, Maya. I was hoping we could speak privately. Do you have a few minutes?" Maya glanced around the bank lobby, aware that several of her colleagues were watching the interaction with curiosity. "I can take a break. There's a conference room we can use." Maya led her mother to a small meeting room off the main lobby, closing the door behind them and gesturing for Helen to take a seat at the round table. "Rebecca called me," Helen said without preamble. "She told me about your conversation at her party." Maya waited, not sure what response was expected. "She's very upset," she continued. "She feels like you've been deceiving the family about your work situation." "How have I been deceiving anyone?" "By not telling us that you were involved in her mortgage approval."
By letting us think you were just a regular bank employee when you apparently have significant influence. Maya felt the familiar frustration that came with trying to explain herself to her family. "Mom, I am a regular bank employee. I process loan applications as part of my job. The fact that one of those applications happened to be Rebecca's doesn't change my position at the bank." Helen frowned. "But Rebecca said you basically saved their application when it should have been denied." "Rebecca is overstating my role. I recommended that her application receive careful review rather than automatic denial. The final decision was made by senior management, but you influenced that decision." "I provided professional analysis based on my training and experience. That's what I'm paid to do." Helen was quiet for a moment, studying Maya's face. "Why didn't you tell us you were involved?" "Because it wasn't relevant to you. Rebecca and David applied for a mortgage. I processed their application according to bank policies, and they were approved. The fact that we're related is incidental." "It doesn't feel incidental to Rebecca." Maya sighed. "Mom, what is this really about? Are you concerned that I acted unethically? Because I can assure you that I followed all proper procedures." "I'm concerned that you're keeping secrets from your family. Rebecca is wondering what else you haven't told us about your life." "What else? Like what?" "Like whether you're actually more successful than you've let on. Like whether you've been deliberately misleading us about your capabilities." Maya stared at her mother, trying to process the accusation. "Mom, I've never lied to you about my job. I work at a community bank processing loan applications. That's exactly what I've always told you." "But you've made it sound like a simple entry-level position." "It is a relatively entry-level position. The fact that I'm good at it and that my recommendations carry weight doesn't change that." Helen leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Maya, Rebecca is questioning everything now. She's wondering if you've been playing some kind of long game, pretending to be less successful than you are while secretly having influence over important decisions in her life." The absurdity of the accusation might have been funny if it weren't so revealing of how her family saw her. "Mom, do you hear what you're saying? You're suggesting that I've been pretending to be unsuccessful for years as part of some elaborate scheme to manipulate Rebecca. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm trying to understand why you didn't tell us about your involvement in the mortgage." "Because I knew this would happen," Maya said, her voice rising slightly. "I knew that if Rebecca found out I had any role in her success, she would find a way to make it about her being victimized rather than me being helpful." Helen's expression shifted, becoming more defensive. "That's not fair to Rebecca, isn't it? She got the loan she wanted for the house she wanted at terms she was happy with. But instead of being grateful that someone in her family was in a position to help, she's convinced herself that I somehow wronged her by not advertising my involvement." Maya stood up from the table, her patience finally exhausted. Mom, I love you and I love Rebecca, but I'm not going to apologize for being competent at my job. I'm not going to pretend to be less capable than I am just to make Rebecca feel better about herself. Helen remained seated for a moment, looking small and tired. She's your sister, Maya. Whatever problems you two have, you need to work them out. I'm not the one who has a problem, Mom. I'm happy with my life and my work. Rebecca is the one who's upset because she discovered that her little sister isn't as pathetic as she thought. Maya left her mother in the conference room and returned to her desk, aware that the conversation had been intense enough to draw attention from her colleagues. She spent the rest of the day trying to focus on her work, but the interaction with Helen had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. That evening, Maya was watering her plants when her phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment of hesitation, Maya answered. "We need to talk," Rebecca said, without preamble, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Hello to you, too." "I'm serious, Maya. This has gone far enough. You've upset Mom, you've confused David, and you've turned what should have been a simple family situation into some kind of drama." "I've turned it into drama?" "Yes, you have, by dropping this bombshell about the mortgage and then refusing to explain yourself properly." Maya set down her watering can and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. "What exactly do you want me to explain, Rebecca?" "I want to understand why you didn't tell us you were involved in our loan approval. I want to know what else you've been hiding from us. And I want to know what you expect from us now." "I don't expect anything from you." "That's not an answer." Maya was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Rebecca, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to really think about your answer." "Fine. If the situation were reversed, if you had been in a position to help me get approved for something important, would you have made sure I knew about your involvement?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had been dropped. "That's different." "How is it different?" "Because I would have told you up front. I wouldn't have kept it secret and then thrown it in your face during an argument." "I didn't throw anything in your face, Rebecca. I mentioned it because you were lecturing me about my pathetic life, and I got tired of listening to it. I was trying to help you." "No, you were trying to fix me. You were trying to turn me into a version of success that you could understand and approve of." Maya could hear Rebecca's breathing on the other end of the line, quick and shallow.
"You think I don't support you?" Rebecca asked. "I think you support the idea of me becoming someone different, someone more like you. What's wrong with wanting you to have more opportunities? Nothing, if that's really what you wanted, but what you actually want is for me to validate your choices by making the same ones. You want me to pursue the same kind of career and the same kind of lifestyle so you can feel confident that you've chosen correctly. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked me about my pottery in a way that suggested you thought it was valuable rather than cute? When was the last time you showed any interest in my work at the bank beyond worrying that it wasn't impressive enough?" Rebecca was quiet again. "Rebecca, I'm good at what I do. I help people achieve their financial goals every day. I've become skilled at reading credit reports and analyzing risk factors and advocating for borrowers who deserve a chance. That's meaningful work, even if it doesn't come with the salary or prestige that you associate with success. I never said your work wasn't meaningful. You said it was embarrassing. You said my life was pathetic. You said I was settling for ordinary when I could have more." Maya could hear Rebecca's sharp intake of breath. "I didn't mean those things the way they sounded." "How did you mean them?" "I meant that I see potential in you that you're not using. I meant that I want you to have the same kind of security and recognition that I have. But what if I don't want the same things you want? What if my version of security and recognition looks different from yours?" The question hung between them, and Maya could sense Rebecca struggling with it. "I don't understand why you hid your involvement in our mortgage," Rebecca said finally. "I didn't hide it. It simply wasn't relevant. You applied for a loan, you were approved, you bought your house. The internal process at the bank wasn't your concern. But it was our concern because you're our family. Then why didn't you ask? In all the conversations we've had about your house and your mortgage and how grateful you were for the approval, why didn't you ever ask whether I might have been involved?" Rebecca was quiet. "I'll tell you why," Maya continued.
because it never occurred to you that I might have had any real influence over something important in your life. Because you've categorized me as someone who works a simple job and lives a small life, and you never questioned whether that categorization was accurate. Maya, I need to go, Rebecca. I have pottery class tonight. Maya ended the call before Rebecca could respond and gathered her things for the evening class. As she walked to her car, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The conversation had been painful, but it had also been necessary. For the first time, she had forced Rebecca to confront the assumptions she had been making about Maya's life and capabilities. The pottery studio was a converted warehouse space downtown, filled with wheels and kilns and shelves lined with works in progress. Maya had been coming here for 3 years, ever since she'd taken her first ceramics class, and the familiar smell of clay and the sound of wheels turning always helped center her thoughts. Tonight, she was working on a series of large serving platters, pieces that required careful attention to the balance between form and function. As she centered the clay on the wheel and began to pull up the walls, Maya found herself thinking about the conversation with Rebecca and what it revealed about their relationship. She realized that part of the problem was that she had allowed Rebecca's version of their dynamic to persist unchallenged for too long. By not correcting Rebecca's assumptions about her work and her capabilities, Maya had inadvertently reinforced them. She had been so focused on avoiding conflict that she had enabled a dynamic that was ultimately harmful to both of them. But Maya also recognized that changing that dynamic would require more than a single revelation about the mortgage. It would require consistently asserting her own perspective and refusing to accept Rebecca's diminishing characterizations of her life. It would mean being willing to disappoint Rebecca's expectations and to accept that they might have a more distant relationship as a result. As Maya shaped the clay beneath her hands, she thought about what she wanted from her relationship with her sister going forward. She wanted to be seen and appreciated for who she was, rather than criticized for who she wasn't. She wanted her choices to be respected, even if they weren't understood. And she wanted to stop feeling like she had to defend her life every time they were together. Maya finished the platter and carefully transferred it to the drying shelf, satisfied with the clean lines and balanced proportions. Tomorrow she would trim it and refine the details, but tonight she had achieved the basic form she was aiming for. As she cleaned her tools and prepared to leave, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Rebecca told me about your conversation tonight. I know this is complicated, but I want you to know that we're grateful for your help with the mortgage, regardless of how it happened or why you didn't mention it. You helped make our dream possible, and that means something to us." Maya stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Thank you, David. That means something to me too." On the drive home, Maya felt a shift in her understanding of the situation. David's message had reminded her that not everyone in her family was determined to view her revelation as a betrayal or manipulation. Some people were capable of simply appreciating help when it was offered, even if the circumstances were complicated. Maya realized that her conflict with Rebecca wasn't really about the mortgage at all. It was about years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding, patterns of interaction that had become so entrenched that both sisters had forgotten they were choices rather than inevitabilities. But patterns could be changed, and Maya was finally ready to change hers. She was done being the accommodating younger sister who accepted diminishing comments in the interest of family harmony. She was done pretending to be less capable than she was to make other people comfortable. Maya Chen was 31 years old, skilled in her profession, talented in her art, and content with the life she had built. It was time for her family to see her as she actually was, rather than as they had decided she should be. Whether they could make that adjustment was up to them. 3 weeks passed in relative quiet before the situation escalated beyond anything Maya could have anticipated. She had settled into a new routine that felt more authentic than anything she had experienced in years. At work, she found herself speaking up more in team meetings, offering insights that drew respectful attention from her colleagues. At the pottery studio, she had begun preparing pieces for a small gallery showing that the studio owner had suggested. Her life felt balanced, purposeful, and entirely her own. Then Janet Holloway appeared at Maya's desk on a Tuesday morning with an expression that immediately put Maya on alert. Janet was carrying a thick folder and wearing the carefully neutral expression she reserved for serious conversations. "Maya, I need you to come with me to Tom's office. There's been a development regarding the Chen Morrison file."
Maya's stomach dropped, but she followed Janet down the hall to the senior loan officer's corner office. Tom Reeves was a man in his 50s who had been with the bank for over 20 years, known for his methodical approach to lending decisions and his unwavering adherence to bank policies. He gestured for Maya and Janet to take seats across from his desk.
Maya, Tom began, opening the folder in front of him. I've received a formal complaint regarding your handling of the Chen Morrison mortgage application. The complaint alleges that you used your personal relationship with the borrowers to influence the approval process in a way that violated bank policies. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Who filed the complaint? Tom glanced at the papers in front of him. It was submitted anonymously through our ethics hotline, but it includes detailed information about your family relationship with Rebecca Chen Morrison and specific allegations about how you manipulated the approval process. Maya's mind raced. Someone had filed an official complaint against her, someone with enough knowledge of the situation to make specific allegations. The list of people who knew about her involvement in Rebecca's mortgage was very short. What exactly does the complaint allege? Maya asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Tom read from the document in front of him. It alleges that you failed to properly disclose your family relationship, that you used your position to advocate for approval of a loan that should have been denied based on standard criteria, and that you subsequently concealed your involvement from the borrowers. Janet leaned forward. Maya, we need to go through this step by step. Can you walk us through exactly how you handled the Chen Morrison application? For the next hour, Maya explained in detail every aspect of her involvement in Rebecca and David's loan application. She provided documentation showing that she had disclosed the family relationship in her review memo, explained her rationale for flagging the file for manual review, and demonstrated that all her actions had been within the scope of normal bank procedures. Tom listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Maya finished, he was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the documents spread across his desk. Maya, he said finally, based on this review, I don't see any violations of bank policy in your handling of this application. You disclosed the relationship, you followed proper procedures for flagging files for review, and the final approval decision was made by me based on the merits of the application. Maya felt a wave of relief, but Tom wasn't finished. However, he continued, the fact that a complaint has been filed means we need to conduct a formal review. I'm going to have to place you on administrative leave while we investigate this matter thoroughly. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Administrative leave meant she would be suspended from work, her access to bank systems revoked, her professional reputation called into question. Even if she was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing, the investigation would become part of her employment record. How long will the investigation take? Maya asked. Typically 2 to 4 weeks, Tom replied. I want to emphasize that this is purely procedural. Based on what I've seen so far, I expect you'll be cleared of any wrongdoing, but we have to follow protocol when formal complaints are filed. Maya gathered her personal items from her desk in a daze, aware that her colleagues were watching with curiosity and concern. News traveled fast in a small bank, and by the time she reached the parking lot, Maya knew that everyone would be speculating about what had happened. As she sat in her car, trying to process what had just occurred, Maya felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. She knew who had filed the complaint. Only a few people knew enough details about her involvement in the mortgage to make specific allegations. And only one of them would be motivated to try to damage her professionally. Rebecca had tried to destroy her career. The drive home passed in a blur of anger and disbelief. Maya had expected Rebecca to be upset about the mortgage revelation, had even anticipated some level of family drama, but she had never imagined that her sister would try to sabotage her livelihood. The betrayal felt deeper than anything Rebecca had done before, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Maya spent the rest of the day in her apartment, alternating between fury and numbness. She tried to focus on practical matters, wondering how long her savings would last if the investigation dragged on, whether other banks would hire her if word of the complaint spread to the local financial community. But mostly she found herself staring out the window, trying to comprehend the level of vindictiveness it had taken for Rebecca to file that complaint. Around 6 o'clock, Maya's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, she answered. Maya, I had just heard what happened, David said, his voice tight with what sounded like controlled anger. Rebecca told me about the complaint. She told you about it because she filed it. The silence on the other end of the line was confirmation enough. Maya, I had no idea she was planning to do this, David said finally. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was convinced that you used your system and that you needed to face consequences. Consequences for what? For helping you get approved for a loan you wanted? She doesn't see it that way.
She thinks you used your position unethically and then lied about it to make her look bad. Maya laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. David, let me ask you something. Are you happy with your mortgage? Are you satisfied with the terms and the interest rate? Of course, but that's not the point. That's exactly the point. You got a loan that allowed you to buy the house you wanted. You're making your payments on time, you're building equity, you're living your dream. But because Rebecca found out that your little sister played a role in making that dream possible, she decided to try to destroy my career. David was quiet for a long moment. She's hurt. Maya, she feels like you betrayed her trust. I betrayed her trust by helping her get a mortgage? By not telling her about your involvement. David, I want you to listen to yourself. You're defending Rebecca's decision to file a complaint that could end my career because I didn't advertise the fact that I had helped you? Do you understand how insane that sounds? I know it seems extreme, but Rebecca feels like your whole revelation was designed to humiliate her. And she thinks the appropriate response is to try to get me fired? David sighed heavily. I don't think she thought through the consequences. She was angry, and she wanted you to face some kind of accountability for what she sees as deceptive behavior. Maya's anger crystallized into something harder and more focused. David, I want you to go home and ask Rebecca a question for me. Ask her if she thinks I should have let your mortgage application be denied, rather than recommending it for review. Ask her if she thinks you should be living in a different house right now, one you could have afforded with a less favorable loan. Maya! Ask her if the bank should fire employees who advocate for borrowers who deserve a chance. Ask her if she thinks I should have recused myself from processing your application and let someone who didn't know you personally make a decision purely based on numbers. Maya's voice was rising now, years of accumulated frustration finally finding an outlet. And then ask her what she thinks will happen to our relationship after this. Ask her if she thinks I'm going to forgive her for trying to destroy my livelihood because she was embarrassed to learn that I'm not as pathetic as she thought. Maya ended the call and turned off her phone, not wanting to deal with any more conversations that day. She spent the evening researching employment law and wondering if she should contact a lawyer. The complaint against her was clearly retaliatory, filed not because of any actual wrongdoing, but because Rebecca wanted to punish her for the perceived humiliation of the mortgage revelation. But proving retaliation would be difficult, and fighting the complaint would be expensive and time-consuming.
Maya realized that regardless of the outcome of the bank's investigation, her relationship with Rebecca was essentially over. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, some lines too important to uncross. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Maya was drinking coffee and reading employment law articles on her laptop when someone knocked on her apartment door. She looked through the peephole to see her mother standing in the hallway, looking smaller and more fragile than Maya remembered. Maya opened the door reluctantly. "Mom? May I come in?" Helen asked, her voice subdued. Maya stepped aside to let her mother enter, noting the way Helen looked around the small apartment, as if seeing it for the first time. Maya realized that her mother had never actually visited her home before, had never shown any interest in the space Maya had created for herself. "Rebecca told me what happened," Helen said, settling carefully on Maya's couch. "About the complaint at the bank. Did she tell you that she's the one who filed it?" Helen's face crumpled slightly. "She says she had to. She says you left her no choice." Maya stared at her mother, trying to process the depth of the family dysfunction that would lead to such a statement. "Mom, do you understand what Rebecca has done? She filed a complaint that could end my career because she was angry that I helped her get a mortgage. She says you manipulated the system and then lied about it. I followed bank procedures and didn't mention my involvement because it wasn't relevant. There's a difference." Helen twisted her hands in her lap, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "Maya, I don't understand all the details about banking and mortgages, but I know that you girls need to find a way to work this out. You're sisters." "Mom, some things can't be worked out. Some betrayals are too big to forgive." "You can't mean that." Maya sat down across from her mother, trying to find the words to explain a situation that Helen seemed determined not to understand. "Mom, let me ask you something. If Rebecca had been in my position, if she had been able to help me get approved for something important, do you think she would have kept it secret?" Helen considered this. "Rebecca would have wanted you to know she had helped." Exactly. Rebecca would have made sure I knew about her involvement because she would have wanted credit for helping me. But when I helped her, I didn't need credit. I was content to let her be happy without knowing the details of how it happened. Maya paused, gathering her thoughts. But when Rebecca found out about my involvement, instead of being grateful, instead of appreciating that someone in her family had been in a position to help, she felt threatened. She felt diminished. And her response was to try to destroy my career. Helen was quiet for a long moment. She says you've been hiding your capabilities, making the family think you're less successful than you really are. I've never hidden anything, Mom. I've told you exactly what I do for work. The fact that you and Rebecca assumed I was unsuccessful says more about your prejudices than it does about my honesty. Prejudices? Yes, prejudices. You decided that because I work at a community bank and live in a small apartment and make pottery in my spare time, I must be failing at life. You never asked about the details of my work or tried to understand what I actually do. Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city beyond. Mom, I process millions of dollars in loan applications every year. I've developed expertise in risk assessment and credit analysis that the bank values highly. I've helped hundreds of families achieve their dream of home ownership. But because my job doesn't come with a prestigious title or a six-figure salary, you and Rebecca decided it wasn't worth taking seriously. Helen was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. I didn't know. I thought you were struggling. I'm not struggling, Mom. I'm living according to my own values and priorities. I make enough money to be comfortable, I have work that I find meaningful, and I pursue creative interests that bring me joy. That's not failure, that's success. Maya turned back to face her mother. But Rebecca can't see it that way because my version of success doesn't validate her choices. She needs me to be struggling so she can feel superior. She needs me to want what she has so she can feel confident about what she's chosen. What are you going to do? Helen asked quietly. About what? About the complaint, about your job, about Rebecca. Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Over the past few days, as the shock of Rebecca's betrayal had settled into something harder and more permanent, Maya had been thinking about her options. The complaint at the bank would likely be resolved in her favor, but the damage to her professional reputation would linger. More importantly, Maya was beginning to question whether she wanted to continue working at an institution where family drama could so easily disrupt her career. I'm going to fight the complaint, Maya said finally. I'm going to prove that I acted appropriately and professionally, and then I'm going to make some decisions about what I want my future to look like. Helen wiped her eyes with the tissue from her purse. And Rebecca. Rebecca made her choice when she filed that complaint. She chose to try to hurt me rather than deal with her own feelings about the mortgage situation. I can't have a relationship with someone who would sabotage my livelihood out of spite. She's your sister. She's a person who tried to destroy my career because she was embarrassed. Being my sister doesn't give her license to do that without consequences. Helen stood up slowly, looking older than Maya had ever seen her. I wish things were different between you girls. So do I. But wishing doesn't change what Rebecca did. After Helen left, Maya spent the day researching employment lawyers and preparing a detailed timeline of events related to the mortgage application and subsequent complaint. She was determined to fight the charges against her, not just to save her job, but to establish a clear record of what had actually happened. That evening, Maya received a call from Tom Reeves at the bank. Maya, I have some news about the investigation, Tom said. We've completed our initial review, and I wanted to update you on our findings. Maya held her breath. Based on our examination of the mortgage file and your handling of the application, we've found no evidence of policy violations or unethical behavior. Your disclosure of the family relationship was properly documented, your analysis of the application was thorough and professional, and your recommendation for manual review was well within normal procedures. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. However, Tom continued, we did discover something interesting about the complaint itself. Our IT department was able to trace the anonymous submission back to its source. The complaint was filed from a computer at Morrison Marketing Associates, which is Rebecca Chen Morrison's employer. Maya wasn't surprised, but having official confirmation felt significant. "What does that mean for the investigation?" Maya asked. "It means we're treating this as a retaliatory complaint filed by someone with a personal grievance rather than a legitimate ethics concern. We'll be closing the investigation and removing any record of it from your employment file." "And my job?" "You can return to work tomorrow if you'd like. Your suspension is lifted effective immediately." Maya thanked Tom and ended the call, feeling vindicated but not particularly triumphant. She had been cleared of wrongdoing, but the fact that the investigation had been necessary at all left a bitter taste in her mouth. The next morning, Maya returned to the bank to find an unexpected level of support from her colleagues. Janet Holloway pulled her aside almost immediately to express relief that the investigation had been resolved, and several other employees made a point of welcoming her back. Word had apparently spread that the complaint had been retaliatory, and there was a general sense of outrage that Maya had been put through the investigation process. "We all knew it was bullshit," said Carmen Rodriguez, one of Maya's colleagues from the loan processing department. "You're one of the most ethical people in this bank. Anyone who works with you knows you'd never manipulate the system for personal gain." Maya appreciated the support, but she found it difficult to settle back into her normal routine. The investigation had clarified something important for her. She didn't want to work somewhere that her family could disrupt her professional life. She needed more distance, more independence, more control over her own career trajectory. Over the next few days, Maya began quietly exploring other opportunities. She reached out to contacts at other financial institutions, updated her resume, and started thinking seriously about what she wanted her next professional step to be. The incident with Rebecca had been traumatic, but it had also been liberating in its own way. Maya no longer felt obligated to maintain family relationships that were harmful to her well-being. A week after returning to work, Maya received an unexpected phone call from someone she hadn't heard from in months. Patricia Hawkins had been Maya's supervisor during an internship at a regional investment firm 3 years earlier, and they had maintained a cordial professional relationship since then. "Maya, I hope you don't mind me calling," Patricia said after they had exchanged pleasantries. "I heard through the grapevine that you might be interested in exploring new opportunities." Maya was intrigued. "Potentially. What do you have in mind?" "We're looking for someone to head up our new community development lending program. It's a position that would involve working with local banks and credit unions to expand access to affordable housing loans. The role would require someone with strong analytical skills and experience in mortgage underwriting, plus the ability to build relationships with community organizations." Maya felt a spark of interest. The position sounded like it would combine her technical skills with her interest in helping people achieve homeownership, but at a larger scale and with more autonomy than her current job. "I'd be very interested in learning more," Maya said. "Great. Can you come in for an interview next week? I think you'd be perfect for this role." Maya scheduled the interview and spent the weekend preparing, researching the investment firm, and thinking about how her experience at the community bank had prepared her for a larger role in community development. For the first time since the investigation began, Maya felt genuinely excited about her professional future. The interview went exceptionally well. Patricia introduced Maya to the senior partners who would be overseeing the community development program, and Maya found herself engaged in substantive conversations about lending practices, community impact, and strategies for expanding access to affordable housing loans. The partners were impressed with her knowledge of underwriting procedures and her track record of successful loan recommendations. "Maya," said James Fletcher, one of the senior partners, "we're looking for someone who can think both analytically and creatively about lending decisions. Someone who can see beyond the numbers to assess the real potential of borrowers and communities. From what Patricia has told us about your work and from this conversation, I think you might be exactly what we need." Maya left the interview feeling energized in a way she hadn't experienced in months. The position would come with a significant salary increase, more responsibility, and the opportunity to have a broader impact on her community. It would also provide the professional distance from her current situation that Maya was seeking. 3 days later, Patricia called with a job offer. The salary was nearly double what Maya was making at the community bank, and the benefits package included professional development opportunities and support for continuing education. Maya accepted immediately. Giving notice at the community bank was bittersweet. Maya had genuine affection for her colleagues and appreciation for the experience she had gained there, but she was ready for a new challenge. Tom Reeves was supportive of her decision, acknowledging that the recent investigation had probably made the work environment less comfortable for her. Maya, you've been a valuable member of our team. Your analytical skills and attention to detail have been exceptional. I hope you'll keep in touch and let us know how you're doing in your new role. Maya's last day at the community bank coincided with a milestone she had been working toward for months. The Pottery Studio was hosting its first group exhibition featuring work by students and regular participants, and Maya had 3 pieces included in the show. She left work early to attend the opening reception, wanting to celebrate this achievement on the same day she was closing one chapter of her professional life. The exhibition was held in a converted warehouse space downtown, with Maya's pottery displayed alongside paintings, sculptures, and mixed media works by other local artists. Maya's pieces were a series of serving bowls that showcased the glazing techniques she had been developing, each one unique but clearly part of a cohesive artistic vision. Maya was studying one of her bowls, pleased with how it looked in the gallery lighting, when someone approached from behind. "Excuse me, are you the artist who made these bowls?" Maya turned to see an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s, holding a glass of wine and looking genuinely interested in the pottery. "Yes, I am," Maya replied. "They're absolutely beautiful. I'm Margaret Winters, and I own a small gallery in the Arts District. I specialize in functional ceramics, and I'd love to talk to you about possibly representing your work." Maya felt a surge of excitement. Margaret Winters owned one of the most respected galleries in the city, known for showcasing high-quality functional art by emerging and established artists. "I'd be very interested in discussing that," Maya said. They talked for nearly an hour about Maya's artistic process, her inspiration, and her goals as a potter. Margaret was knowledgeable about ceramics and asked thoughtful questions about Maya's glazing techniques and design philosophy. By the end of the conversation, they had scheduled a studio visit for the following week. As Maya drove home from the exhibition opening reception, she reflected on the dramatic changes her life had undergone in the past few months. She was starting a new job that would challenge her professionally and allow her to have a broader impact on her community. She had the opportunity to show her pottery in a respected gallery, potentially reaching a wider audience for her artistic work. And she had finally established clear boundaries with family members who had been undermining her self-confidence for years. The cost of these changes had been high.
Her relationship with Rebecca was essentially over, and her relationship with her mother would never be the same. But Maya was beginning to understand that some relationships were too toxic to maintain, regardless of family connections. 2 weeks into her new job, Maya was settling into the rhythm of her expanded responsibilities when she received an unexpected visitor at her office. The receptionist announced that someone named David Morrison was asking to see her, and after a moment's hesitation, Maya agreed to the meeting. David appeared in her office doorway looking haggard and uncomfortable. He had clearly lost weight since Maya had last seen him, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Maya, thank you for agreeing to see me," David said, taking a seat across from her desk. "I know this is awkward, but I needed to talk to you." Maya waited for him to continue. "Rebecca and I are separating," David said quietly. "I've moved out of the house and we're starting divorce proceedings." Maya was surprised, but not entirely shocked. The mortgage complaint and its aftermath had revealed fundamental character issues that would be difficult for any marriage to survive. "I'm sorry to hear that," Maya said, and she meant it. Whatever her feelings about Rebecca, she had genuinely liked David and hadn't wanted to see their marriage destroyed. "I need you to know that I tried to stop her from filing that complaint," David said. "I told her it was wrong, that you had helped us and didn't deserve to be punished for it. But she was so angry, so convinced that you had somehow manipulated the situation to make her look bad." Maya nodded. "I understand that you were in a difficult position." "No, that's not why I'm here," David said, leaning forward. "I'm here because I need you to know what really happened after you told us about the mortgage." Maya waited. Rebecca couldn't handle the idea that you had more influence than she realized. She became obsessed with the thought that you had been playing some kind of long game, pretending to be less successful while secretly pulling strings in her life. David paused, gathering his thoughts. "She started going through your social media, looking for evidence that you were living better than you had let on. She called mutual acquaintances,
fishing for information about your job and your finances. She even drove by your apartment building multiple times trying to figure out if you were hiding assets or living beyond your apparent means. Maya felt a chill of unease. The level of surveillance David was describing bordered on stalking. When she couldn't find any evidence that you were secretly wealthy or successful, she became convinced that you were planning to use the mortgage information against us somehow. She started seeing your involvement as a threat rather than a favor. So she filed the complaint as a preemptive strike? Maya asked. Exactly. She thought that if she could damage your credibility at the bank, you wouldn't be able to use your position to hurt us in the future. Maya shook her head in amazement. It never occurred to her that I had no intention of using the information against you. I tried to tell her that, but she wouldn't listen. She had convinced herself that you were dangerous, that you were capable of manipulating financial systems to harm people who crossed you. Maya was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Maya, I need you to know that I never shared Rebecca's paranoia about your motives. I always believed that you had helped us out of kindness, not calculation. But I failed to protect you from her retaliation, and I'm sorry for that. Maya appreciated David's apology, but she was more interested in understanding the full scope of what had happened. Is there anything else I should know? Maya asked. David hesitated. Rebecca tried to convince your mother that you were a threat to the family's financial security. She told Helen that you probably had access to everyone's banking information and could use it to manipulate or blackmail family members. Maya felt a surge of anger. Is that what my mother believes? I don't know. Helen seemed confused by the whole situation, but Rebecca was very persuasive when she wanted to be. David stood up from his chair, preparing to leave. I know you probably never want to see any of us again, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in your family believed Rebecca's version of events. And I wanted to thank you again for helping us get the mortgage. Whatever else has happened, you made our dream house possible, and that meant something to us. After David left, Maya sat at her desk for a long time, processing what she had learned. Rebecca's behavior had been even worse than Maya had realized, involving surveillance and character assassination that went far beyond the mortgage complaint. Maya felt vindicated in her decision to cut off contact with her sister, but she also felt sad about the dysfunction that had made such behavior seem reasonable to Rebecca. That evening, Maya called her mother for the first time since Helen's visit to her apartment. Mom, I wanted to talk to you about some things Rebecca may have told you about me, Maya began. Helen's voice was cautious. Maya, I don't want to get in the middle of whatever is happening between you and your sister. I'm not asking you to take sides, Mom. I'm asking you to think critically about claims Rebecca may have made about my character or my intentions. Maya spent the next hour explaining the full context of the mortgage situation and the subsequent complaint, making sure Helen understood both what actually happened and what Rebecca's response had revealed about her character. Maya also addressed the specific paranoid allegations that David had mentioned, helping Helen understand why they were both unfounded and concerning. Mom, I want you to understand something important. I've never had an intention of using my position at a bank to harm family members or anyone else. The fact that Rebecca could imagine me doing such things says more about her mindset than it does about mine. Helen was quiet for a long time after Maya finished speaking. I owe you an apology, Helen said finally. I allowed Rebecca to convince me that you were somehow dangerous or manipulative. I should have trusted my own judgment about your character. Thank you for saying that, Mom. What happens now? Helen asked. With Rebecca, with the family? I can't have a relationship with Rebecca after what she's done, but I'd like to maintain a relationship with you if you're willing to see me as I actually am, rather than as Rebecca has characterized me. I'd like that very much, Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. Over the following months, Maya's life continued to evolve in positive directions. Her new job was challenging and rewarding, involving her in complex community development projects that had real impact on local housing availability. She worked with nonprofit organizations, local governments, and financial institutions to create innovative lending programs that helped families achieve home ownership who might not qualify for traditional mortgages.
The gallery relationship with Margaret Winters also flourished. Maya's pottery was featured in a group show that received positive reviews in the local arts press, and several of her pieces sold to collectors who appreciated her unique approach to functional ceramics. Margaret began representing Maya's work exclusively, and they developed plans for a solo exhibition the following year. Maya's relationship with her mother improved significantly once Helen was no longer receiving Rebecca's distorted interpretations of family dynamics. They began having regular phone conversations and occasional dinners, rebuilding a connection that had been damaged by years of miscommunication and manipulation.
Maya learned through Helen that Rebecca and David's divorce had been finalized, and that Rebecca had been forced to sell the house when she couldn't afford the mortgage payments on her single income. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that the house Rebecca had been so proud of, the one that Maya's intervention had made possible, had ultimately become a financial burden that Rebecca couldn't sustain alone. Maya felt no satisfaction in Rebecca's misfortune, but she did feel a sense of cosmic justice in the way events had unfolded. Rebecca's attempt to destroy Maya's career had backfired spectacularly, leading instead to Maya's professional advancement and Rebecca's own personal and financial difficulties. 1 year after the housewarming party that had started everything, Maya was preparing for her solo pottery exhibition when she received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address showed Rebecca's name, but at an address Maya didn't recognize. Maya almost threw the letter away without opening it, but curiosity eventually won out. "Maya," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I needed to try to explain and apologize." The letter went on for several pages, detailing Rebecca's perspective on the events of the past year. She acknowledged that filing the complaint had been wrong and that her behavior afterward had been driven by insecurity and jealousy, rather than any legitimate concern about Maya's conduct. "I realize now that I was threatened by the discovery that you were more capable and influential than I had given you credit for," Rebecca wrote. "I had built my identity around being the successful sister, and learning about your role in my mortgage approval forced me to confront the fact that my understanding of our relationship was completely wrong." Rebecca went on to describe the personal and professional consequences of her actions, including the end of her marriage and the loss of her home. She took responsibility for these outcomes and didn't ask for sympathy, but she wanted Maya to understand the full scope of what had happened. "I know that you have no reason to forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. I'm only asking that you understand that my actions came from my own insecurities, not from any rational assessment of threat or harm. You didn't deserve what I did to you, and I'm sorry." Maya read the letter twice, then set it aside. The apology was more thoughtful and comprehensive than she had expected, and it provided some closure on questions that had lingered in her mind. But it didn't change the fundamental fact that Rebecca had tried to destroy Maya's career out of spite, and that such a betrayal couldn't be forgiven simply because Rebecca now regretted it. Maya filed the letter away and returned to preparing for her exhibition. She had more important things to focus on than Rebecca's attempts at redemption. The solo pottery exhibition opened on a crisp evening in late October, exactly 1 year after the housewarming party. The gallery was filled with Maya's work: bowls, vases, serving pieces, and sculptural works that showcased her evolution as an artist over the past several years. The pieces were displayed with careful lighting and spacing, creating an environment that highlighted both their individual beauty and their cohesive aesthetic vision. Maya stood near the entrance of the gallery, greeting visitors and discussing her work with collectors and art enthusiasts. She wore a simple black dress that she had bought specifically for the occasion, and she felt confident and comfortable in a way that would have been impossible a year earlier. As the evening progressed, Maya was approached by a familiar figure. Tom Reeves from the community bank appeared with his wife, both of them carrying glasses of wine and looking genuinely pleased to be there. "Maya, congratulations," Tom said warmly. "Your work is absolutely beautiful. I had no idea you were such a talented artist." "Thank you for coming," Maya replied. "It means a lot to have your support. I wanted to tell you that we've missed you at the bank. Your replacement is competent, but she doesn't have your intuitive understanding of borderline applications. You had a real gift for seeing potential where others might see only risk." Maya appreciated the compliment, but she also felt a sense of completion about her time at the community bank. That chapter of her life had been important for developing her skills and confidence, but she had outgrown the limitations of the position. I'm very happy in my new role. The work is challenging and rewarding, and I feel like I'm making a real difference in community development. As Tom and his wife moved on to examine other pieces, Maya was approached by Margaret Winters, who was beaming with satisfaction at the exhibition's success. Maya, this is going even better than I had hoped. We've sold 6 pieces already, and I've had several inquiries about commissioning custom work. I think we can safely say that your career as a professional artist is officially launched. Maya looked around the gallery, taking in the sight of people engaged with her work, discussing the pieces with knowledge and enthusiasm, and appreciating the aesthetic vision she had spent years developing. The success felt earned rather than accidental, the result of consistent effort and gradual improvement rather than luck or manipulation. As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, Maya helped Margaret close the gallery and secure the remaining pieces. She felt tired but deeply satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that comes from achieving something meaningful rather than simply surviving something difficult. Driving home through the quiet city streets, Maya reflected on the dramatic changes her life had undergone in the past year. She had lost some relationships that seemed important at the time, but she had gained so much more: professional recognition, artistic success, financial security, and, most importantly, a clear understanding of her own worth and capabilities. Maya realized that Rebecca's betrayal, as painful as it had ultimately been a gift. It had forced Maya to stand up for herself, to demand recognition for her contributions, and to refuse to accept diminishing characterizations of her life and work. It had prompted her to seek better opportunities and to take her artistic pursuits more seriously. Most importantly, the whole experience had taught Maya that she didn't need anyone else's validation to know her own value. She was skilled at her profession, talented in her art, and capable of building the kind of life she wanted on her own terms. The people who couldn't see or appreciate those qualities weren't worthy of her energy or attention. As Maya pulled into her apartment complex parking lot, she noticed that the building management had installed new lighting that made the entrance look more welcoming. Her apartment might not be as impressive as Rebecca's former house, but it was hers, filled with things she loved and choices she made deliberately. Maya climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, thinking about the call she would need to make to her mother tomorrow to tell her about the exhibition's success. Helen had been following Maya's artistic career with increasing interest and pride, and Maya knew she would be thrilled to hear about the sales and the positive reception. Inside her apartment, Maya poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her couch surrounded by the pottery pieces that hadn't made it into the exhibition, but that marked her journey as an artist. Each piece represented a stage of learning, a technical challenge overcome, an aesthetic vision refined. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Hawkins, who had attended the exhibition earlier in the evening. "Maya, congratulations on a beautiful show. Your work is stunning, and I'm so proud to see you thriving in both your professional and artistic pursuits. You're an inspiration to everyone who knows you." Maya smiled and typed back a quick thank you, then set the phone aside. She was tired of thinking about validation and recognition, tired of measuring her success against other people's expectations. She was simply ready to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived according to her own values. As Maya prepared for bed, she thought about the year ahead. There would be new challenges at work, new artistic projects to pursue, and continued growth in both her professional and personal life. There might even be new relationships to explore, people who could see and appreciate her for who she actually was, rather than who they needed her to be. Maya Chen was 32 years old, professionally accomplished, artistically recognized, and finally, completely comfortable with exactly who she was. It had taken a family crisis and a career upheaval to get her to this point, but she wouldn't trade the hard-won wisdom and self-confidence for anything. The woman who had walked into Rebecca's housewarming party a year ago, carrying a small gift and wearing a thrift store dress, had been someone seeking acceptance and approval from people who were incapable of providing it. The woman who had emerged from that experience was someone who no longer needed anyone else's permission to recognize her own value. And that transformation, Maya realized as she finally drifted off to sleep, was worth every painful moment it had taken to achieve. The next morning brought a new beginning that Maya embraced with confidence and anticipation. She had work to do, art to create, and a life to live on her own terms. And for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough.